Rolling out with the break of dawn. Canvas skies and the show goes on. Iron stakes and the hammer sound. Building dreams on this muddy ground. With sawdust running through our veins, we do it for the faces in the crowd. Step right up with R&B, 'cause this ain't just a show, it's circus history.
And welcome to Off the Rail Podcast, where we talk all things circus. Today, I'm your host, B. R's on vacation. And today we are joined by Alexander Lacey. How's it going, sir?
That's right. I'm fine. I'm very good. Thank you. We finally managed to meet and do this interview. We've tried to do it, I think, probably about 4 or 5 times over the last couple of months, but I'm always missing the deadline for one reason or another. But anyway, I'm here now.
Awesome. Well, we always ask our first question is, how did you get to the circus?
Okay, so where do I start? So I suppose the best thing would be to have a little bit of family history. So basically, my family ended up in the circus business because of my father. So my father was born in England. His father was an RSM, a regimental sergeant major in the British Army. And when he was a little boy, they were stationed in India. And when he was about 5 years old, it was the time when the English were kicked out of India. But for those first 5 years of his life, he grew up there and he spoke Hindi, actually. He had a lot of Indian friends and he spoke fluent Hindi. And he fell in love with the wildlife of India. So my grandparents had a house on the edge of the jungle. And basically, the backyard of the house was the jungle. So my father remembers when he was little, he used to play in the backyard. And they had like a big steel drum where they used to collect the water. And every morning, I guess it was it wouldn't have been a baboon. They're from Africa, but maybe a mandrill. Anyway, a huge monkey used to come out of the jungle every morning about the same time and go to this big steel basin and drink some water. And my father would go to the end of the garden every morning and meet this monkey and feed him little bits of tidbits, whatever he could find in the kitchen, steal from my grandma. And of course, because it was the jungle, there would be all sorts of, there would be elephants every now and again would walk through the backyard. You had to be careful of tigers and leopards and things like that. But he basically fell in love with the wildlife. So cut a long story short, when the British Army left India, or were kicked out, so to speak, actually my grandmother told me a funny story about that before she passed away. So as they were, my grandmother was very posh, and they had servants in those days. When they were leaving India or getting kicked out, they had to get from their house to the army base because the locals were, they basically were not happy with the English and they were basically trying to kill them. So instead of my grandmother running with the kids, they got into one of those, I guess like a tuk-tuk, and they had one of their servants run as fast as he can, pulling my grandmother and her 3 young children, or 2 young children at the time. Sorry, my uncle wasn't born yet. And she's whipping the servant to go as fast as he can so they can get away from the locals. They managed to get to the army base through the gates. The gates kind of closed behind them like a Indiana Jones kind of movie. And they get to the base. Anyway, they fly back to England. So my father grew up in England after that. And he loved animals. But of course, in England, the only way he could really get involved with animals was to work in agriculture, become a farmer. They didn't have lions and tigers and things like that in England. So he went to school and then moved on to agricultural college when he's a little bit older. My grandfather, unfortunately, passed away when my father was very young. And so he had to look after the whole family. So to get himself through agricultural college and also to look after the family, provide my grandmother with with an income. Because my grandfather actually committed suicide, so my grandmother wasn't allowed the army pension. If you was it was frowned upon in those days, of course, to do such a thing. So she was really left in the lurch. She didn't have any income, so my father had to make money somehow. So he got a job at the local zoo, Chester Zoo, and he took on everybody's overtime. So he worked with all the animals in the zoo, not just whatever animals he was allocated with. And he basically was in his element. He loved being around the animals. Long story short, he ended up buying later on a zoo of his own, created his own zoo, and then later on a second zoo. And what he found is that he loved animals, he loved being around the animals, but in his opinion, the animals in the zoo were bored. They needed something to do. So he began to train all the animals in the zoo, and he would teach the keepers how to train the animals. It's very basic in the beginning. Basically, they just basically interacted with the animals. And what he found is that the animals really enjoyed that time of day where they were suddenly busy. They had something to do. They looked forward to the keepers coming and interacting with them. My father became
It's like a workout.
very... Sorry?
So just like a workout. It's they're stretching their muscles.
Yeah, exactly. So then what happened is he actually became very good at training chimpanzees and male lions. Because all the animals in the zoo were also trained, he used to work for the BBC, and he would bring some of the animals into the studios and he would show them off on a very famous children's show at the time called Magpie, later on Blue Peter. And because he had such an extensive knowledge of animals, they used to invite him to take over from certain nature program narrators, and he would do the voiceover. He would narrate the program. But because he was so good, he never needed a script. They was always flabbergasted that my father could come in and talk about whatever animal was being shown on the TV. He could narrate, tell you all about the animal, where it was from, etc., etc. And even to this day, it's incredible. He's 80. I've got to get this right now. He is 84 years old this year, and he has an encyclopedic knowledge of animals. If you go to the local zoo, you'll know a few things. Oh, that's a tiger, that's an elephant. They come from here, they come from there. But you can go from the reptiles to the amphibians, to fish, to mammals, any kind of animal. And they always have the plate there in the zoo, and it'll tell you where the animal's from, its scientific name. It'll tell you a bit about the animal. He can tell you anything about every single animal that's in that zoo without looking at the plate. It's incredible. Anyway,
wow.
Through this love of animals and this time he spent training the animals at the zoo, he began to start to work in the TV industry. But then he used to start to do galas where he would basically they're like fetes and fairs, things like that. And he would take his lions to the fairs, and he would do a little lion act, which was very, very well received. And he became more and more known in that line of work. And then he was spotted by a circus director. He ended up working in the circus. The circus was much more lucrative than his zoos at the time, because his work in the fairs was actually financing to the zoos. So he also met my mum in the zoo. She was one of the zookeepers. So they eventually got out of the zoo business when I was about 4 years old and joined the circus business full time. He was an artist. He was very good at PR. He could spin a tale. He was very good at promoting. So whatever shows we worked on, as well as his lion act, he would also do the advertising and promotion for the shows. In those days, there was the red telephone boxes, and he would disappear every time we arrived at a new site with a big bag of 10p pieces, and he'd put them in the phone, making all his phone calls, trying to arrange everything. And then later on, he ended up running shows, became a circus director, and eventually owned his own circus. And that's basically how we got into the circus business. So that's a very long-winded answer to your first question.
Oh, wow. Okay. What was the name of your father's circus?
So originally he joined up with a very famous English circus director called Jerry Cottle, and they ran the show together. It was 50-50. That was very successful, and then they ended up taking out 2 shows. Eventually they split up, parted ways, and my father bought the circus from Jerry Cottle, Unfortunately, business was not good after he bought the show. He was very good at running circuses for everybody else, but not for himself. But over the time that he had his own show, it was called originally Circus Harlequin. Later on, it was the Russian Circus, then the Mongolian Circus, then Lacey Brothers Circus at one point, and eventually the Great British Circus, which was very successful, actually. The Great British Circus was the name of the circus before he retired. My brother and myself had left by the time he'd gone to that stage of producing circuses, and we'd gone off on our own careers to work in mainland Europe with our big cat acts.
Nice. So
Yeah.
what drew you to big cats? Was it just your dad's love for it and his act?
Yeah, so I remember when I was a little kid, we'd be working on the circus. In those days, it was the canvas tents, as you say in America, and we used to go into the tents during the performance whenever my father was working, and later on my mother as well, with big cats. And I always liked to. I knew the show would always be running. We'd know all the music. The kids would be playing outside. We used to help backstage as well. Leading the horses to the tent, grooming the horses. There was a Cossack on the show. I remember when I was a little boy, with all female Cossack acts. So we liked to spend our time in the stables because all the Cossack ladies, they all liked us as little boys, and we always used to get a kiss on the cheek and things like that. So we used to hang around the horse tent, grooming the horses. So I remember the music would play, and we'd always recognize the music to different acts. And whenever my father's music would play, I'd always go in and watch the lion act. My brother as well, but the two of us. And my father was very different at the time because there was a lot of big circuses around in those days, very famous lion and tiger trainers, wild animal trainers. But the style was very, how could I compare it? If any of your listeners have heard of Clyde Beatty, it's that kind of style. My father was very laid back, very relaxed. He really showed off the relationship with the animal and the friendship, and it was received really well. And I decided when I was very small that I wanted to do the same thing. Fortunately, my parents insisted that we go to boarding school and have an education, and I'm very glad they did that because, unfortunately, in the circus business, a lot of us don't get a very good education. And it was a really good eye-opener for my brother and myself because we got to see the circus business and live in an environment, obviously people that are not from the circus world, where we could kind of soak up people's opinion of the circus and of animals and what they thought. And that helped us a lot later on in our careers because we also followed in the same footsteps as my father, the way we presented our act. But also we were both very, very heavily invested in the way our animals were presented, not just in the ring, but outside the ring, the enclosures, how the animals were kept, the care for the animals. That was something that was very important to us, and also something that my mother especially installed in us, that we have to really care for the animals properly. First and foremost, the show comes second, and that helped us a lot in our careers. We've both been very successful. We've worked all over the world. And for a good chunk of both of our careers, there were many companies and circuses that wouldn't take any other cage act except for my brother and myself, which was, very nice. And I think it spoke volumes about the care and the way we presented our animals, yeah. Without trying to blow my trumpet, but anyway, there you go.
Yeah, no. All right. So you said your dad
You
did
can ask me
lions.
anything you want. Sorry?
You said your dad did lions, right?
Say that. Yeah, my father
I was
presented
saying-
lions. So he presented
And you
lions. There's a
guys
bit
have
of a
tigers.
time gap, sorry for talking. Yeah, so he presented tiger. He presented lions. He worked with tigers and lions, black panthers, many other types of animals as well. Like I said earlier, chimpanzees, elephants, exotic animals, camels, zebras. I mean everything. But he was especially known in the circus business for his lion act, and my mother for her tiger act. And later on, my mother moved to the States. She worked for John Cuneo, Hawthorne Corporation, with his white tigers. Before that, she worked in England with another company called Chipperfield, Club Chipperfield's Gym Club especially, with a polar bear, Kodiak and Himalayan bear act. Um, yeah, and I always wanted to work with smaller cats, with leopards and black panthers especially. But my father put me off the idea. Well, he didn't put me off the idea. He didn't let me do it because he said they're far too dangerous, much more dangerous than tigers and lions. Um, Much easier to start with the big cats first and move to the smaller cats. And for a lot of people, that seems a bit strange that the smaller ones would be more dangerous. But later on, when I worked in America, I actually worked with a leopard. His name's Mowgli, and I still have him. He's in a zoo that we part own in England. He's retired, um, and I realised very quickly that the smaller cats are a lot more dangerous and a lot more difficult to work with. He was a great leopard, but I realised that having more than one would be difficult. I just worked with the one leopard. They're very intelligent. They're the only animal I know that can jump and do a right turn in midair. It's unbelievable. It's very strange. But yeah, but he was a really good leopard actually. I worked with him on ringlings. I worked with him on a lead. We were in the float in the spec finale, and yeah, a really nice leopard. Yeah.
Right on. So, what would be the difference between working with a leopard and a tiger?
Yeah, just like I said, they're very intelligent. They're a very stubborn animal. I suppose well, tigers are also more stubborn than lions. For me, the easiest cats in the world to work with are lionesses and castrated male tigers, from my experience. Um, Basically, castrated male tigers are really quiet, cool, get along with each other. Lionesses, if they grow up together, all get along with each other. When you start to mix male lions in, it can become difficult because male lions want to be the dominant cat. If you have one or two, like I have in the photo behind me, much more easier than working anything than three and above. They tend to squabble a lot and fight, and then obviously if they start fighting, you have to try and get involved to stop it, and that's very dangerous. And then leopards, the smaller cats and tigers, they're the kind of animals that if they don't want to do something, you don't ask them twice. No is no. But of course, if you want to make sure that a cat works for you for its entire lifetime with no trouble, you have to make sure they don't learn to say no. So the idea is to always be one step ahead, not give the opportunity to refuse, and that way they never learn to say no. Because once these guys understand that they can say no, there's no man on the planet that's big enough, or woman, or strong enough to try and force a big cat to do something it doesn't want to do. So the idea is always to be one step ahead of the animal and never ask them or expect them to do something that you feel they're not going to be able to do or not want to do. And leopards and tigers are particularly stubborn, so you have to be really on your toes to make sure that you don't ask them to do those sort of things. Listen, you can ask me anything you like as well. We don't have to just stick to big cats. I can tell you, people always want to know about horror stories or the bad stories. They don't want to know always about the
We're
great
getting to
stories of the
that.
circus. So ask me whatever you like. I've got some stories.
Okay. How many circuses have you performed with? Like you said, you've
Ooh.
traveled the world. So roughly, how many do you think you've performed with?
Wow. To tell you the truth, it would. I don't. Let me think. A lot. A lot. I mean, been very lucky to be contracted by all the best circuses in Europe. There's many. There's many to list. Ringlings, of course. Ringlings was one of my top contracts in the fact that I really love America. I really love working on Ringlings. They provided facilities that were second to none, and of course we got to see all of America. And of course, it was Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey. It's the greatest show on earth. It really was, or really is. Maybe I haven't seen the show since.
No
Um,
comment.
I sorry.
No comment.
Okay, fair enough. So, um, so what? Actually, interesting thing. So, I'm an animal person. I grew up in traditional circus and traditional, with animals and things like that. And so, I always listen to people that say, "Yeah, the circus is not the same as it used to be," and it's not. We miss this and we miss that, and I understand that completely. And of course, I would love to see the animals in the circus and traditional circus, but I also completely understand it from the other side as well, because I've been in this business my whole life since I was about 12 years old. I've been actually physically involved with the animals. And I grew up around all of the animal activists and all the nonsense that people would talk. And it is very tiring. You do get fed up of it. And from a business point of view, it really was, and it really is nearly impossible for shows to tour with animals these days. And a lot of these directors have to take the the financial decision, business decision, to do what's best for their company. So I hold no grudges to the fact that Ringlin's moved in that direction. I understood it
Oh,
full heartedly. Did I like it? No. But did I think they had to do it? I think it was necessary for their business. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. And to tell you the truth as well, the audience, if they go away from a performance, the children have laughed. Hopefully, the adults have laughed. Everybody's enjoyed themselves. If they go away having had a good experience, a good time, then unfortunately they don't miss the animals because they've had a good time, and that's the most important thing for a family when they go out, that they have a good time together. And if a show can provide that with or without animals, then they've achieved their goal. And so yeah, I really get it. I get it. I don't like it, but that I get it completely.
no, I understand that too. And I'm not saying anything on Ringling or their current show. It's just, I mean, you got to understand, I was there for the last Elephant Walk.
Yeah, okay.
So,
I was too.
oh, wait. Well, I was on Red Unit.
I used it already. Okay, so
So,
hang on a minute. Of course you were the last elephant walk because you had the elephants. Our elephants left before yours. Is that right? We were open
about
longer,
3 weeks
but
prior.
did we still have elephants back then? I can't remember now if the elephants were in the last show. The elephants weren't in the last
Oh,
show,
wait,
were
no,
they? Or were they?
because
Yes, they
you
were.
were
We
on
had
the
the
blue.
elephants. Yeah. I was on the blue unit. Yeah, yeah. We had the elephants. I think to the last. I can't remember now. I forgot. I forgot what was in the last show. If we had elephants or not.
No, I remember
Anyway,
it was Terry, and it was a very emotional day that day. But
yeah, it was 100%. I remember my last performance was very emotional. I was the last big cat trainer. There you go. You've had the last ringmaster, Jonathan, and
at the
I was
last
the
Train
last
Master,
big. hmm I did. I actually, you know what? I didn't actually realize that till just now. I was the last big cat trainer, and we were the ones with the elephants to the longest as well. I remember we did have the elephants after you guys. So it's a long time ago now. What was that? That was 9 years ago already. My goodness.
2017.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, so how do you manage walking into a ring with big cats?
Yeah,
Like
I grew up with
mentally.
it, and yeah, I grew up with the big cats, and like I said, my parents did it before me when we were very young. We used to help bottle feed some of the big cats. Often the parents would have up to 5 or 6 cats. They only have 4 teats, so you have to get involved then to help bottle feed them. We always try to leave the cubs with the parents. It's the best upbringing for the cubs is the best milk, and also the parents teach them manners as well, which is very important. So we always try to leave the cubs with the parents if we can. And no, I'm not scared of the animals, because what I was taught first and foremost by my parents was you have to learn to understand the animals, read the animals really well. So for the first 5 years, just because I was a director's son, and my parents were big cat trainers, didn't automatically mean I was allowed to train big cats. For the first 5 years, I had to clean out the living areas, feed them, pick up the poop, all of the nasty stuff, so to speak. But just being on the outside and spending your time around the animals, you learn so much. You get to learn when the animals are hungry, thirsty, if they're in a good mood, a bad mood, even if they've got a headache or an upset stomach, if they're angry, if they're feeling energetic, feeling well, feeling good. And all of that, learning to read the animals, is what keeps you safe in the ring, because I know or not just me, any good animal trainer of any kind of animal, not just lions and tigers, if you spend enough time with your animals, you're always one step ahead. You can read them very well. Um, and so, for that reason, I know if a performance is going to be dangerous or not dangerous, or if it's going to be dangerous to work with a cat, sorry. And if I feel is something is not quite right, or it's not going to work out, or an animal is not in the mood to perform, then I just leave them out the show. And I would often work with a large number of cats. When I was on Over England, I was working with 14 cats. If I had one or two cats that were having an off day, I just used to leave them out of the show. So it's not really a case of you're Superman or super brave and you're going with a cage full of animals, a cage full of big cats. It's just the fact that you know your animals very well, and you can be very sure before a performance that you have put yourself in the safest position possible before you enter the ring. And so that's how you go into a cage full of big cats. You know that you've minimized the risk as much as possible.
Okay. What if you're sick or injured?
Yeah,
Would you
that doesn't
perform
matter.
that
I got
day?
injured. No, if so, our my family's way of training animals has always been very heavily through sign language, voice commands, and your body language. So, an interesting fact: people often say to me, often animal activists, we don't understand if the animals are happy. They can't tell us how they feel. We don't know. And I always say that's the perfect remark from somebody that doesn't know anything about animals, because tigers and a tiger and a tiger, a lion and a lion, a horse, an elephant, they communicate with one another perfectly. They understand each other perfectly. They know if the other animal is going to be aggressive, not aggressive, is being friendly, or everything. But they don't talk, they don't use words, but they do that through body language, through their communication. And as an animal trainer, you have to understand that body language. Tigers and lions communicate through the way they hold their ears, their shoulders, their breast, their chest, their head, their tail. And the combination of those movements in different positions and things like that is the way they communicate with one another through facial expressions as well, whether they bare their teeth, to what degree they bare their teeth, if they bare their teeth with their ears back, if they bare their teeth with their shoulders high. And this body language, how tigers and lions communicate with one another. And if you learn that body language, you can very quickly understand if an animal is in a bad mood, doesn't want to do something, is happy, not happy, hungry, and so on. And so, because you can read the animals very well, you speak their language. It might not be words, but you speak their language. Same with deaf people. Deaf people cannot talk. They use their hands for sign language, and we understand deaf people perfectly if you can speak sign language with your hands. And it's just the same with animals.
Okay. So, what are some interesting stories that you haven't really told many people were close calls? Maybe some tigers got out?
Oh, okay. So many years ago, when I headed off on my own career, so um, so we worked on my father's circus. He ran a circus, like I said earlier, with Jerry Cottle. They ended up going their separate ways, and then he had his own show. About that time is when my brother and I finished our studies in boarding school, and so we came back to help my father run his circus. Unfortunately, we fell on very hard times. Business wasn't good. It was very difficult. We worked day and night. We didn't sleep. We would travel with the circus from one town to the next, and then because we didn't have many drivers and many staff, we would go back and get the next trucks. And by the time we got in with the last trucks and the loads onto the lot, we didn't get any sleep because the sun was rising. It was time to build up, and then it would take us all day to build up because we didn't have any staff and the weather. And sometimes it would be all night getting pulled off one lot because it was muddy. You arrive at the next lot, it was muddy. You'd been pulled onto the next lot with the winches on the trucks and tractors. And anyway, so on and so on. And my brother and I, we worked really hard to help my father run the show. But at one point, we just got fed up, basically. We didn't get paid for years, but that wasn't the problem. It was just all the work that was involved. So we ended up leaving my father's show. And we went to the winter quarters. We left in the summer, so we went to the winter quarters for the remainder of the year to Dickie Chipperfield's farm, the Chipperfield Circus. You might have heard of them in England. Got a big bug flying around here. And when we arrived, first of all, we had to ask Dickie if we could arrive. So hang on a minute, I have to go back a little bit. So when we decided to leave my father's show, we had to call up Dickie, and I said, look, we're leaving my dad's show. I've got 12 lions and tigers. I need somewhere to stay. They were all young animals at the time. It was a new act that I was training. Me and my brother, we need somewhere to stay. Can we come to your place? So he said yes. So we borrowed a truck from my father's show. We pulled my beast wagon and my brother's trailer and my trailer to Dickie Chipperfield's farm. And we arrived at lunchtime. Dickie was taking his lunch break at his house off the property in the village. And so we parked my beast wagon in front of a small shed, which we later found out was the quarantine shed. And there were 6 tigers inside. So we parked the beast wagon in front. We go off to just have a quick around the farm while we're waiting for Dickie to arrive. And we decide to walk back to my beast wagon. As we walk back to the beast wagon, there's 6 tigers outside just walking around the farm. And we're like, what the heck? So my brother and I somehow managed to corral these tigers back into the quarantine shed, which had been, one of the keepers had left the lock off the door and the door open, and the tigers managed to get out. So anyway, we managed to get all these tigers back into the quarantine shed, close the door. We were like, we couldn't believe what had happened. And then Dickie Chipperfield turned up. And we told him what had happened. He was like, oh, did you get back in? We said, yeah. He said, okay, right, come with me. I'll show you where to park your trailer. And we were like, what? This isn't normal, is it? And we later found out that on that farm, it was notoriously known for animals to get out. And that's where my mother actually learned to train the bear act there as well. And in the evening, you wouldn't go out of the caravan in the evening because you were worried that on this farm, there might be a polar bear outside, or a leopard, or a lion, or a wolf, or a hyena, because they had so many different animals there. So it was notoriously known for the animals to get out. Yeah, so that was our initiation process of arriving at the Chipperfield farm. And so we stayed there. So then Dickie Chipperfield, he showed us around the place, and a real circus guy. He said, okay, boys, to me and my brother, he said, I can give one of you a job. I can't afford to pay both of you. But if you help look after the animals, you can use my practice barn, and there you can finish training your tiger act. You look after my animals in the morning, you can help me with practice, and then you can train your animals after lunch in the afternoon. He said, but unfortunately, I can only afford to pay one of you. So of course we had no other options, and we said yes, no problem. That's good with us, and it was actually fantastic because we learned so much from Dickie Chipperfield and also Jim Clubb, who was both those guys supplied big animal acts to Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey over many years, and to all the best circuses in Europe over many years. So we learned a lot from him. So in the mornings, we would clean out his animals, practice his animals with him, help him, feed his animals, bed them down. And then in the afternoon, I would train my animals. But we had absolutely no money, my brother and I. We were skint. And Dickie Chipperfield offered us £100 a week. He offered me £100 a week, which is not a lot of money. In those days, it would have been equivalent to probably maybe $120 a week. But on this $120, I had to feed me, my brother's girlfriend, 2 Alsatian dogs, and 12 lions and tigers. And on top of that, Dickie Chipperfield, being a real circus guy, said, from the £100 that I'm paying you, you need to pay £20 for rent and electric and water. So then we were left with £80, literally like just a little bit more than £10 a day. And so, yeah, I don't know how we did it, but we managed to survive. I would tell my brother and his girlfriend at the time, Tina, you can only butter the bread on one side because when you fold it, then it's a sandwich, because we can't afford butter. We have to be very careful with the food, and this went on for the whole time we were there. We were there from the middle of summer till December, so the whole summer. And I remember one time, my brother and Tina, they got so fed up with me being so tight about the food and always eating just the cheapest food that we could buy, that they one time they took £50, which is half a week's wages, all the money, and there was a little lane that ran through the farm, and they planted the £50 on the lane, and they said, "Oh, Alex, let's go and take the dogs out for a walk." And I said, "What? You normally do that?" I said, "Nah, come on, we'll go for a walk." So we went out for a walk, and we walking down the lane, and then my brother, and he's really bad acting, said, "Look, £50 on the floor. No way." So I said, £50? I said, "That's amazing." And Tina said, "Listen, it's £50. We're not going to save it. Let's treat ourselves. We're going to go to the Chinese. We're going to get the best takeout we can have. We're going to feed ourselves. We're going to have a feast." So anyway, we go to the Chinese, we get the feast, we bring it back, we're eating it, we're finished. We're all sat there like, "Oh, that was amazing." And then they said, "Alex," said, "What's wrong?" So "We've got something to tell you." I said, "What's up?" Said, "That £50, yeah." So that was the half a week's wages. He said, "We couldn't go on eating this crap food anymore. We had to eat properly." And I went ballistic. I said, £50? This is half the week's wages. We've got no money to eat for the rest of the week. So anyway, there was a lot of this that went on. It was a real struggle in the beginning, but fortunately, like I said, we were in this little barn, and helping Dickie train the animals every morning. And then when Dickie would go away, at lunchtime, I would train my animals in the afternoon. Dickie didn't get on with Gym Club, but Gym Club was an amazing trainer. He used to let me go and watch him in the afternoon. I wouldn't tell Dickie, and I used to watch him practice. Dickie and Jim, they never told you how to train anything, but if you're interested in anything, any job, and a professional is letting you watch how they do it, they don't need to tell you anything. You just learn volumes from watching them see how they do it. So I learned so much from Dickie Chipperfield and Gym Club. We used to sit in this little barn on these old circus seats. We had an old ring fence. I think you call that the ring curb, if I remember, in America. It was full of dust. It was painted white with old carpet on top. And there was mice running in and out of this ring fence at the quiet moments while Dickie was concentrating training these animals. You had in the summer, you'd have the sparrows and the birds flying in and out this shed, this barn. And I used to sit in there. I used to think to myself, when you think of all the amazing animal acts that have come out of this shed, they've worked on ringlings, they've worked in Kinney, Krona, all the best circuses in the world. That when Ringlings went to Japan, all these big acts came out of this one little dusty old barn, and it was a great experience to learn from that. And then towards the end of the winter, towards winter time, I was in a bit of a dilemma because I had to decide. I had this old beast wagon, and I had these 12 lions and tigers, and I had to decide what I was going to do for the next year, because I didn't have any contract. And my ex-wife's family, they had a circus in Ireland, and a friend of mine that was a cousin of theirs worked on a circus in England, and we knew each other quite well. And I gave him a call, and I said, if your cousins are looking for a cat act for their show, because my act's I've nearly finished training it, it'll be ready for this winter, and I don't have a contract. So he spoke with his cousins, and they're Irish, and in typical Irish fashion, as I learned over the years, they said, "Yeah, no problem. We're interested. We'll be there next week." And this was like in probably like October time. The contract was for December, so I was waiting. A week passed, a second week passed, and I gave them a call. I said, "Listen, are you coming over to see the act? Because I need to know what's happening, because if not, I'll look for another contract." I didn't have another contract. I was just trying to be clever and push them. So they said, yeah, we'll be over next week. Anyway, this went on and on and on, nearer and nearer to Christmas when the contract would have began. And I was in a dilemma because I only had a little bit of money, and I had to decide, do I invest this money in my beast wagon and some props and a cage and a truck to be able to get to this contract in Ireland, or do I save that money? Because if they don't want the act, I've spent all this money on equipment, I have no contract, how am I going to feed my animals, and etc., etc. So anyway, this went on and on and on until in the last moment they turned up 10 days before the contract would begin. And the act wasn't very good in the beginning. I was training the act. It was okay, but it wasn't that great. But it all hung on the fact that I used to have this male lion, the father to this guy here. He was called Masai, just like this guy was. And I used to do the head in the mouth trick. And that's, as soon as they seen that, they said, "Okay, we'll sign a contract." That's all they were interested in. They took out the American 3-ring circus in Ireland, and I was the center of the ring with. And the idea was that I was going to do that. I did do the head in the mouth trick, so that sold them. That sold the contract for me. So now, unfortunately, though, the only problem then was that I had 10 days to get all my equipment painted, welded. Yeah, it was. I was
A lot
up
of
all night.
work.
I didn't sleep for 10 days. I had a friend on the farm because I couldn't weld at the time. I taught myself later on how to weld. And we would go around the farm, and they had old circus trucks, and we would go and cut bits of metal off the truck so I could weld things onto mine to make the cages bigger. And yeah, it was a real, and I was spraying my truck at like 3 o'clock in the morning and doing oil changes. And anyway, I managed to eventually get everything ready. And then I had no money. So I called up the director of the show. His name was John Courtney, and I said, trying to be all clever, I said, "Listen, John, I still don't have my ticket for the boat. You know, you said you're going to pay for the ticket. What's happening?" And he said, "No, we'll do it. We've just been busy." But the thing was, if he'd said, "No, you got to pay it for yourself and we'll give you money when you get there," I would have said, "Well, can you pay it for me? Because I can't afford it. I can't get to you." So, yeah, I filled the truck with diesel. I headed off to Ireland. I thought I was being clever to take a shortcut through Wales because that's a more direct route to the ferry across to Ireland, because there's I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a sea between England and Ireland.
Yeah.
And because I was trying to be clever and go the shortcut, I ended up going through the mountains, and I only had a certain amount of diesel in this truck, and I was watching the diesel gauge go down and down and down because I took the mountains. It was using more diesel to get to where I needed to be, and I was just thinking, "Oh, I hope I don't break down. I need to get to the boat." Anyway, I eventually got to the boat. I got on the boat, and I arrived on the other side. And I don't have much diesel in the truck. And I call up John Courtney, and I can't get hold of him. I eventually get hold of him. I said, "John," I said, "I'm here in Dublin. Where do I need to be?" And he said, "Oh, we're in Whitehall." Whitehall was in the centre of Dublin. He said, "Just drive there. You'll see the place." So I drove in, and I arrived at Whitehall, and I don't see the circus. And I think, what's happening? So I've got this great big long truck, and I start to drive through all the little housing estates in the city, and I'm looking for this circus. I can't find him, so I'm calling him. He's not answering again, and I'm watching my diesel gauge go down. And he said, "Look," I eventually got hold of him. I said, "Look, where's the show? I can't see it anywhere." I said, "I'm here in Whitehall." He said, "No, we're not in Whitehall. We're just down the road in Dundalk." So just down the road to an Englishman is probably a couple of kilometres. So I thought, "Oh, just down." He said, "You just head out of Dublin. You'll see the signs for Dundalk, direction Belfast. We're just on the left-hand side in a farmer's field." All right, okay. So I'm driving, and I don't want to miss the turn, and I'm looking at my diesel gauge. So I'm driving like really slow. And in those days, when I arrived in Ireland, there was no motorways. The main road between the two biggest cities was basically a 2-lane road, one going that way, one going this way. And I was driving like probably about 25 miles an hour because I didn't want to miss the circus. And I eventually found the show after 3 hours of driving, because it wasn't just down the road; it was 75 miles down the road, and I had a traffic jam of traffic behind me because they were all trying to overtake beep beep, but I didn't want to miss the thing anyway. So I'm watching my diesel. I eventually arrive and as I arrive on the ground, the truck conks out. There's no diesel. I arrive there, and John's brother is called Stephen, and he would forever take the piss out of me, saying the tight Englishman arrives on the ground with no diesel in his truck. Anyway, they pull me into place. They pull the truck into place. It was a really muddy lot. They parked my truck and my beast wagon opposite one another. I unload all my caging, the ring cage, the props, and I spent 10 days painting all of these props, cages, and polishing all the props and making everything pristine. I unpacked it all. And like I said, I arrived at the place. The mud, it was was 2 foot deep, the mud, and wind and rain. And anyway, they parked the equipment for me. They had to pull me in place with the tractor. And I said to them, I said, look, I haven't slept for 10 days. I said, I'm absolutely knackered. When did the rehearsals start? And they said, look, there's a big storm coming. We're not going to do any rehearsals. We're going to be up for the next 2 days with this tent. Go and have a nap, and maybe you can just stick around to help us in case there's any problems with the tent. I said, yeah, sure, of course, no problem. So the truck that I had a room in it, but I didn't have time to finish the room. I had a bed in there, and there wasn't even a partition wall between the room that I had and where I packed the cage and the props. It's like an empty truck with a bed in the corner, and I managed to put a shower in there quickly, but I only had cold water because I didn't get the gas heater working, because it didn't have a proper bed, and it was bloody freezing cold with no heater, because in those days the electric was only from like 9 o'clock in the morning, or it was on generator till I think 11 o'clock in the evening. So overnight you had no electric. So on the cab of the truck was a pod. We call it a pod. Basically, it was an extension of the cab, and you could go up through a little trap door into this pod, and it was really cozy because it was only like probably maybe 6.5 feet long, so just enough room to lay down, and probably about 3.5 foot wide and about 3 foot tall. So your body heat in this little pod would keep you warm. So I went up to the pod to go to sleep. Anyway, I woke up and I went outside, and all my props and all my cage that I spent all this time painting and getting pristine, they were all laying on the floor all around the tent. So I said to Stephen, I said, what's happened? And before I could get the words out of my mouth, he said, where have you been? I said, what do you mean, where have I been? I said, I've been in a pod asleep. I went for a kip. He said, we seen you last 2 days ago. We thought you'd seen all the mud and ran away. I fell asleep for 2 days in the pod because I was so tired.
Wow.
That I didn't wake up for 2 days, and they thought I'd ran away when I seen the disaster that I'd arrived at. And what they'd done, they took all my cage and props and tied them around the tent to keep, I don't know what you call those in America, the wallings of the tent, the plastic that goes around the tent. It was all flying everywhere with this. Yeah, the canvas. It's all flying everywhere with this huge storm that they'd taken all my cage along with other stuff and ratcheted it all around the tent to stop it blowing around. And I'd slept through this huge storm, and like they'd all been up for 2 days, and they were like, where the hell have you been? Yeah, so that was my arrival to my very first contract on my own in Ireland. Yeah, and of course, no money, so I didn't have a driver's license in them days. I was driving illegally. I had no tax on the truck, and yeah, it was the Wild West in those days when it all began.
So what led you to Ringling?
So I worked in Ireland for 4 years. My very first contract from Ireland was on Circus Krone in Germany at Christmas. And then I went to France, and after France, I ended up working back in Germany again on a circus called Circus Barham, which was run by Gerd Simonite Barham, a very, very famous wild animal trainer here in Europe, who ran a show called Circus Barham, which, long story short, nicked their name from Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey when it visited Europe in I think it was probably the 60s back then, perhaps. Anyway, and while I was there, Tim Holst actually came over to see the show, and he offered me a contract. But it was the very start of my career. I was just getting to be known. I'd landed this very good contract on Circus Barham, very good circus in Germany. Monte Carlo was knocking on the door, then Monte Carlo Circus Festival. I'd worked on Circus Krone, Circus Knie were interested. So there were so many good contracts to still fulfill that I wasn't really too pushed to go to work on Ringlings, actually. So Tim Holst came over. The contract they offered wasn't really that interesting either. And so I basically turned that down. Between that time, which was 2000 and, let me get this right, about 2003, roughly 2003 when he first came over, to 2011, they actually came scouting and asking me to join the show another 3 times. Tim Holst came over 3 times in total, and Vinicio Murillo the 4th time, so 4 times altogether. And eventually I signed the contract with Vinicio. By then I'd done everything I wanted to do in Europe. I'd worked everywhere that I'd planned to work. I'd worked in many places a couple of times. I'd already done Monte Carlo twice. Most people don't get to do it once. I've done that twice. I've worked in Krona many times. Stuttgart, Carré, all very famous places I'd worked. Hagenbeck. Yeah, I was very lucky, very, very lucky. My brother and myself, we were very lucky. We worked in a lot of good places. And yeah, and then Ringley's came at the right time. And I thought, yeah, now it's time to go. So we signed the contract. I spoke with Vinicio and David Kaiser. David Kaiser? That's his name, isn't it? The clown?
Yeah,
David
Kaiser.
Just make sure I get that right. Nice guy, very nice guy. Yeah, we were up till 5 o'clock in the morning to sign that contract. They came over. It took, I think we started at 5 in the afternoon, so a good 12 hours to sign the contract, because it's like a book, the Ringling contract. And every time I wanted to change, you had to call America and they had to get the solicitors involved. And then there was a time delay. And anyway, so yeah, eventually signed the contract. And in November 2011, we got on the plane, which is another story, and flew over to America. And yeah, I had a great time in America. Absolutely loved it. Was heartbroken when they decided to close. Probably if they'd kept me, I would have stayed there until they didn't want me anymore, till they kicked me out and said, Alex, you're too old, get lost. It was a great contract. I love working there. Really good times.
So what happened at the airport? I have to ask now.
Yeah. So yeah. So typical Ringling fashion, as I learned later on, they were also trying to save money. So they got this airline that wasn't the best of airlines. And we were on the tarmac, and for some reason there was a discrepancy between the airline and the company, the floor crew, I don't know what you'd call them, that would load the pallets of tigers onto the aeroplane. And because of that, it was delayed. And then the pilot told us, listen, if we don't hit a time slot, then we're going to have to unload we're going to have to fly another day, which for me was not an option, because the cats traveled in these boxes that they were comfortable in for a short period of time. They weren't a lot, for a flight, loaded a flight, get to the side, unload, fine. Some of them didn't want to get into the boxes. It took us a lot of time with the meat and to try and tease them into the boxes. We finally got them into the boxes. So to not get onto this flight and have to bring them all the way back to the winter quarters, unload them, and then try and load them a second time later on was just going to be impossible. So the pilot said to me, he said, Alex, if we can get half of your cats loaded, they can't refuse to give us another time slot to leave today. So there's me, the captain in his pristine white shirt, his crew, and we're all trying to load these cats onto the aeroplane. We're pushing the boxes on, we're helping the crew. And the pilot, he was bald, or he's balding, and he had, do you remember that stuff that people would put on their hair back in the day? It's like a powder, and it would make your scalp look dark so you wouldn't notice that you were thinning. Anyway, this pilot used that stuff, and he was sweating. So as we're pushing these boxes on, all this black water or sweat is running down his face, and it's colored black from this stuff they had in his hair. It's all over his pristine white pilot shirt. So that was the start of the of the thing. And I was like, oh Jesus. Anyway, so we got all the boxes on, and because it was an empty plane, it used to be a passenger plane. They took all the seats out. You could tell it wasn't a proper cargo plane. So we were allowed to sit up front with the pilots, and there was no wall between the pilots and where we sat. There was one between the cargo, the cats, and the rest, and the crew and us, but not between us and the pilots. And I'm sat on this plane, and I'm looking at the dashboard, and I look at it, and it all looks a little bit old and rough. And then I see hanging out from underneath this dashboard these big chock blocks, we call them. You know, when you try to join electric cables together, you have a plastic block with a screw there and a screw there, and you screw them in to join a. So I always see all these chock blocks hanging out, and I'm thinking to myself, this doesn't look right to me. And then what I never realized, you don't feel it when you're on a passenger plane because you're sat over the back wheels. But when you're in the front of the plane, you're sat over that center wheel. And the pilot has to keep that center wheel over those lights on the runway. We call them cat's eyes on a normal road. And they're really thick. So if you're sat over that center wheel the plane really shudders in the front because every time it hits one of those cat's eyes, it bounces. So I'm sat in the front, and it really starts to shudder, and this this dashboard of the aeroplane is really moving up and down and wobbling, and I'm thinking, is it going to fall to pieces? And we're on this plane, and we've just gone through this whole thing of trying to load all the cats on the plane ourselves, finally get into a time slot where we can take off, see these chop blocks, the plane starts, and I think, oh my God, are we going to get to America? Anyway, we finally take off, and then it's a smooth cruise, and we eventually get to America, and we arrive in Miami, with in the winter. Of course, Miami winter is nothing like the Holland winter that we just left, and we're not properly dressed. And we arrive there, they open the plane, and the heat hits us, and we have to sit in Miami for a few hours while we clear customs, and the Ringling's trucks turn up to load the cats, and we're just not used to the heat. But anyway, we arrive. They drive us from Miami to Tampa to the fairgrounds. We unload the cats into the Ringling Beast wagons, and then our American story began. But it was an experience, to say the least.
So, two-part question. One,
Yeah.
how's Florida heat? I'm from Florida myself. And two, did it affect your cats in performing?
Yeah, so okay, so Florida heat, if you're not used to the heat, is difficult. It's very hard. The mornings were beautiful. The mornings were amazing. We were used to waking up to the cold winters in Europe, and of course, all of a sudden, winter in Florida is just amazing. Winter in Florida is far nicer than summer in Florida. I learned that later on before we flew back. Before we flew back, because we had to spend the summer in the fairgrounds before we flew back. It did affect the cats outside, because we were parked outside with the cats on the lot. But when it came to working, it wasn't such a problem, because, as you know yourself, all of the arenas were air conditioned. The Tampa arena was not air conditioned, because I think the Ringlings didn't want to pay the bill over the whole of the rehearsal period, although it was still a lot cooler than being outside. The heat does affect the cats. But when we were on tour, Ringling was very well organised, and Mr. Feld, I think Mr. Feld had just about every single good artist from every line of work ever worked for him. He's seen it all, he knew it all, and I think he appreciated the fact that me and my team were very dedicated to our job. We were always very professional. We always went above and beyond what was expected to us. And for that reason, he was always very accommodating to me whenever I asked for something extra or something that we needed. He knew if we were asking, it was because it was needed. It wasn't us just trying to be awkward. And so for that reason, we always had swamp coolers outside for the animals. We had swamp coolers during the journeys. If it was too hot on a lot, he'd make sure that we were parked inside in the air-conditioned building. So, like I said, the animals were really, really well cared for, and the heat didn't affect the animals as much as it could have done. We were looked after very well.
Okay. So you've traveled all over the world. What would be one of your favorites? This may be a two-part question too. What's your favorite spot in America that you've been to? And what would be your favorite place to perform anywhere in the world? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, the first time I worked in America, you would take your compliment, and in Europe, applause is straight away, because the audience is literally 5 meters away, which is what's that? It's 15 feet. Yeah. In America, the nearest audience in those big arenas was probably about a good
75
40
to 100 feet.
away. Yeah, exactly. And then the last row, if you're working, for example, in the NRG Stadium in Houston, Texas, I mean, I don't know, they must be 100 feet away. So what I noticed is when you did a compliment, you had to wait a second for the applause to start. But you had to wait for it to start, because it wouldn't just all be at once. It would start, and then it would work its way up to the top row, and then it would go quiet from the bottom row up to the top. It was a bit odd in the beginning. So, that was something that I noticed about America. I'm English, and I had a microphone. I didn't like it at first. Mr. Feld insisted that I used it, and he was dead right in the end because the Americans love the English accent. And I actually found a way to play with the audience a little bit during my act, and it worked really well for me. So he was right there. And so, yeah, I mean, the American audience was amazing. I can't complain. I loved working in the States. I don't think we really ever had a bad audience in the States, but that wasn't your question. Your question was, what was the favorite lot? Favorite lot, I guess. There's so many different things. I don't like the heat. So although California was amazing to work in, and Florida also, I'm not a big fan of the heat. And so it was great to be in in Florida, sorry, in California, and visit those places and be in those places. But I found somewhere, for example, like
Kentucky,
Denver, Colorado, for
Denver.
example, much more easier to work, much more relaxed. Um, really difficult to say what's the best slot. And then sometimes you're in a building like Barclays Center in Brooklyn. There we didn't take the RVs, so we got to live as a what would you call them? A Brooklynite. I don't know. We got to live in an Airbnb, so we lived in the city. That was an experience. Traveling through Arizona and New Mexico, the deserts, and even Texas. I never knew that the desert could be so beautiful, incredible. Just America's amazing, and the landscape's incredible. The people are incredible. Everywhere's different. The north completely different to the south. The east to the west. It's really difficult for me to say what was the best lot. When it comes to Europe, the best audience, also difficult, but I think in general, probably Germany is the best audience for circus. They're a very well educated audience. They know when they're watching something that's good. It's very difficult to cheat the German audience. If something's not good, they know straight away. But on the same hand, like I said, they really appreciate something that's good. They're a well-educated circus audience. But equally, it was really nice to work in Holland. In Holland, I worked in the Carré Theatre in Amsterdam, a very prestigious venue. It's a theatre. They take out the bottom row of seats. They put a circus ring in there. And then the audience are seated like in a theatre. They put a bleachers up on the stage because you work at in the, I guess, the area where the lower seats are and the orchestra would normally be. It's difficult for me to say the best lot in America and the best audience. That's probably about the best answer I can give you what I've told you.
Okay.